Alright, so today I got something awesome. What we're going to be doing is designing an alloy wheel in Fusion 360. And this is something you can 3D print and you can use it for your RC cars or something similar like that. And it really is a fun one. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to try and go slow so some of you new guys can follow along. Typically this wouldn't be aimed at a complete beginner, but if you are interested in learning how to use Fusion 360, check out my beginner's course. I'll leave a link in the description below. I recommend you go check it out. So first thing we're going to do, create a new project, and once we're in, we're going to create a new component. And this is always good practice. Whenever you add something new to your workspace or something new to your model, you create a new component. So let's right click our component tree, new component. We can double click and we're going to rename this to alloy wheel. Now from here we can expand this, and I want to create a new sketch. I'm going to sketch top down. So you can see here my grid settings are set up to be 10 millimeters per square. Typically this makes things a lot easier for you to follow along, so I recommend you go check out how to set that up, or if you're not too bothered, just follow along as you like. So typically when we design an alloy wheel, for example, we need to create some kind of profile for it. And when you see this, it's probably not going to make much sense to you, but when you see how we use this, things will come together a bit more. So I'm going to be doing this off the top of my head pretty much, but obviously if you were going to be designing this for real, you'd be adding your own measurements and all that stuff. So we're going to grab the line tool. I'm just going to basically sketch out a profile for this alloy wheel. And we're just going to create a simple pattern. And as I said, you know, it's going to look a little bit weird to you until you see how we use this. So I'm going to join everything up. Just follow the pattern. And when you're done, we can hit escape. Now you can see here these aren't even, and we don't want that. We want everything to be nice and even because it'll look great. So we're going to hit D on the keyboard, which brings up our dimension tool. And if we click between two lines like this, we can set the dimension. Now as I said, ideally you'd have all this kind of planned ahead if you were designing this for a real scenario. But for this tutorial I'm just going to kind of wing the measurements a bit. But we will be using some parameters, which again comes into parametric modeling, which if you're keen to learn about, and I highly recommend you do, I do cover that in my course as well. So I'm just going to define all these. I'm going to make that 10 mil. Same for these, 10 mil. And this just stops Fusion 360 breaking things, because you're essentially just giving it a bunch of rules to follow. And that's how you keep it happy. You have to tell it about these things. So we've got our basic pattern. And now I'm going to add a dimension to tell it how high this is from the center point. Because at the minute it's currently just floating in space, right? Fusion doesn't know where this is. So we can tell it where it is. So if we use the dimension tool, we select the center point and anywhere on the design. We could say, okay, that's 180 mil above the center point. And this is essentially going to be our radius for the wheel. So if we come up to modify, change parameters, this is where we'd make use of parametric modeling. So I'm just going to add in a user parameter here and call it alloy radius. And let's make that 180. And I'll show you what this is in a second. So we're going to hit OK. If we double click where we entered 180 before, we can now enter that parameter in. So if we enter alloy radius, hit enter, we can now finish the sketch. And if we come up to Revolve, select the profile of the sketch you just created. Usually it'll select it by default, and then we need to pick an axis that we want to revolve around. So make sure you've got axis selected. And then we're going to select the red axis here, which is the X axis. And you can see when you click that what happens, right? And this is starting to look a lot more like an alloy wheel now. And you can see why it was more useful and more productive to do it this way. We could have, created a cylinder, hollowed it out, and then cut into it, but that takes so much longer. This is the way to go. So make sure your operation is new body, hit OK. And then over in our sketches folder, we want to rename our sketch. Always do this, it's good practice to name your sketches. So we're going to call it outer alloy. And we do the same for the body. We want to rename that as well. Outer alloy. And this just makes things easier for yourself. You're going to be going back and forth all the time. You just want to know what's what in your workspace. So back to what I was talking about before. If we go up to modify and change parameters, the reason we set this up is so that we can change it and adjust it easily on the fly, right? And if we enter this and make it 250, watch what happens to our model. You can see it adjusted for us. And that basically just allows you to tweak your model a lot quicker. And typically you do this for all parameters if you really want it to be true parametric modeling. But obviously this is a tutorial. If I was going to do that, it would take ages and I don't think you'd sit through it. So I'm just going to use it for some variables, and obviously some of the patterns and the spoke patterns and things are a bit trickier. So I'm going to go for 180 here, hit OK. And now that we've got our basic shape, we want to sort of decide on how we want the front part to look, because that's what an alloy wheel is all about, right? The fancy bit of the front that makes it look awesome. But first we need to think, let's go to the front view. So let's look at the side here. So we need to decide, do we want it to just have a flat front on the front of the wheel? And that would be okay, but it doesn't look that nice, right? It's a lot nicer if we can follow some kind of inward curvature or even an outward curvature. I think most alloys tend to curve inwards, just typically because they scratch easy and it helps protect them. But obviously this is your design, you can do whatever you want. So I'm going to create a new sketch. So we're going to go up to create sketch, and I'm going to sketch on this plane here. And if I show you which one that is, you can see quite easily. And we're going to go to the front view. Now what we're going to do is use the arc tool. So if we come up to create arc, 3-point arc. And if we scroll to the side, we can see that our alloy steps in here at 10 mil. And a lot of the nicest looking alloys sort of tend to begin at an offset from the front, right? It just looks a lot nicer because you get that sort of seam around the edge. So we're going to start 10 mil from the top and 10 mil in from the front. So that would be here, right? So we're going to place our first point. And then our second point is going to be on our center line. And this is because we're using the Revolve tool. And you always want to be basing around the center point for the Revolve tool. So we're going to click there. And notice now it's asking us to place our third point. Typically you want this to be halfway, but it doesn't have to be exactly half. It's up to you, right? And with this kind of curvature, less it tends to be more. Like you could go crazy and do something like that, but it's not going to look good. So we just want a nice little curve, and I'm going to go for something like that. So you can see there, we're just slightly curving in. And when we create our pattern on the front, that's going to add a really nice touch. And I think you'll see what I mean. So what we need to do now is join this up to create a sketch that we can revolve. So in order to do that, everything needs to be joined. So if we just use our line tool and just join all the lines up like this, you can see now we've got something that we can select. But first we can add in another parameter if we want to. So if we go up to modify, change parameters, I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it alloy underscore offset. I'm going to make that 10 mil. Hit OK. Now again, if we hit D on the keyboard, we can select a point on our sketch and a point on our design, and we can use that to set a variable. So let's set it to alloy offset. Now what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to change where we want the alloy to start. So if you want a really deep alloy wheel, you can use this. If you want a not so deep one, you can set it to 0, right? And it can all be done from that parameters menu. We want to do the same thing here on the back as well. So we want this to be 10 mil, but remember we use a parameter, so we type in alloy offset. And what this one's doing is it's limiting the back, right? Because if you don't want it to extrude back too far or cut back too far into the alloy, because it tends to be stepping down as we get to the center. So if we cut too far back and come beyond this point, it's going to cut a hole in the center of our alloy, and we don't want to do that. So we're limiting it to this point basically. So once we've done that, we can hit finish sketch. I'm happy with that. And now we can revolve this. So if we go up to revolve, we can click on our sketch plane. Usually it'll be selected, as I said. And then we just want to select the axis again. So remember, we want to select the x-axis, or the red one. Hit that. And you can see it's trying to cut here. And we don't want to do that. We want to come to operation, change it to new body. And you can see it's essentially just created a flat looking front, which is what we want for the time being. So we're going to hit OK. And you can see it looks kind of flat, right? But it's not. It's slightly curved, and you can kind of see that as the light hits it. But that'll become a lot more evident when we do our pattern. So before we move on, we rename our body. We're going to call it alloy front. Hit enter. And we're going to call this one alloy front. Hit enter. And there we go. So now we're going to create the sketch on the front of our alloy. And this is going to define how it's going to look, the nice pattern. And this really makes it, this is the main part essentially. So we're going to construct an offset plane to do this. So typically what you do, is you create a sketch and you'd select a surface. But in Fusion you can't sketch on a curved surface. It needs to be a flat surface. But to get around that, what you can do is just construct an offset plane. You select the plane that you want. I'm going to select this one. And then you want to pull it out slightly in front of wherever you're sketching and just hit OK. And then you can create a new sketch, select that plane, and as you can see, we're just sketching on the front here. So we want to center that up, and we need to create 2 circles first of all. Because we're sketching on an offset from the actual object itself, it has no reference to the 3D object. So we're just going to create 2 new circles. The first one is going to be essentially the hub of the wheel. So we're going to make that 40 mil. And again, let's make a parameter for it. So let's change parameter. We're going to create a new one. Alloy hub. And let's make it 40 just for now. Then we can double click that, rename it to alloy hub, and it's that simple. So we're going to go up to center diameter circle again, and this time we're going to sketch out the radius, or the diameter in this case, of the whole thing. Now we know the diameter is 360 mil, but I want to actually offset it just a little bit. So I'm going to make it 358, just to make the cut a bit cleaner, because if you cut exactly on the edge, sometimes it does some horrible things. So I'm just going to bring it in slightly. And that's going to let us now define our pattern within these boundaries. So if we grab our line tool, we can now essentially sketch out something that we think is going to work. And initially you can just do this by eye, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. Just something by eye to get you started, and you can always adjust it later on. So I'm going to go for something kind of like this, I guess. Maybe if we bring these out a bit wider, like this. Let's trim that one first. Let's grab our line tool. Let's go to there. maybe try that. So we're just gonna kind of eyeball it, see what we can get away with. That looks quite nice. I'm quite pleased with that. And I think I'm just gonna maybe add these two. That looks alright. I quite like that. It looks kind of symmetrical. I don't think it's perfect, but it'll do. So once you've defined that, make sure that your points are in line with the circle you created. This makes sure we can select them later on for extrusion. Okay, so now what we're going to do is grab our circular pattern tool. So if we come up to create, circular pattern, what this allows you to do is select objects in your sketch, and it'll let us duplicate it essentially in a circular fashion. And this saves a lot of time. You know, you can imagine having to try and draw all these out. It's going to take ages. This is the way to go. So we're going to just select all the parts of our sketch like this. And then we're going to select our center point. So on the tool on the right, we're going to click that, select our center point. You can see that it's added another 2 in for us by default. But you can change this quantity value here. Let's just try 10. Maybe try 12, see if we can get away with that. And you can see that's quite nice. We've got a nice little gap between each one. So we're just going to hit OK. And now if we have a look around a bit, you can see that's quite nice. Now what we're going to do is apply that to this surface that we created, right? And in order to do that, what we're going to have to do is cut away anything that we don't want to keep. And that way, we'll be cutting back into that front alloy piece that we created, leaving only the stuff we want, which will maintain that curve. So if we go up to extrude, select all the bits that we don't want, so you can go around the whole thing. And sometimes it is a bit easier to maybe do one first and then apply a circular pattern to bodies instead, and you can do a cut that way. But sometimes that can be problematic because a lot of the time when you're creating these patterns, they don't always match up nicely depending on what you're trying to do. So in that case, you'd have to adjust them in the sketch mode first before going on to this, which is why I did it this way. So now that we've selected everything, we want to extrude backwards, so we're cutting, right? So we want to change operation to cut. And we want to start, so if we click this drop down, we want to start from object, and the object's going to be the front of our alloy, which you can see there we've selected. And then we're going to select extent to object, which is going to be the back of our alloy, which is there. You can see what it's done there is it's cut backwards. So now if we hit OK, this can take a while as again for calculations. So you can see now, look at that. How awesome is that, right? And if we look at it side on, zoom in a bit, you can see that it's following that curve, that nice curve that we created before. So rather than just have a flat front looking alloy, what we've got now is this nice pattern that we've defined, but also that inward curve, and it just looks awesome. And it really stands out. So that's the basics of the alloy. Again, we're just going to rename our sketch here. I'm going to call it alloy pattern. We're done with that, so we can hide it. And now what you can do is add a tire as well. So if we go to our original sketch, which was outer alloy, let's go to the top. We can add in a tire with our line tool. So if we just sketch out the width of this, then we're going to create a new parameter again. We're going to call this, let's try tire height, and we're going to make it 20 mil. Hit OK. Now we can hit D on the keyboard, select our tire. I'm going to make that tire height, same on the other side as well. Tire height, finish sketch. Now we're going to have to show that sketch again, so we can click this to show the sketch. And now you can see that we've got this going around the edge. And if you want to, you can create a new component for this. You don't typically have to because it's kind of part of the same component. But since it's something you'd be printing separately, I think you could probably do it as a component. But I'm just going to extrude it for you. So we're going to go up to Revolve, select that part that we want to revolve. Again, we select the axis. We're going to revolve around the x-axis like before. And you can see that just creates that tire for us. And now it's starting to look really cool. And instead of operation of join, we're going to create a new body and hit OK. And we can rename that body to tire. We can hide that sketch. And to make this look a little bit more realistic, you can apply a fillet tool. So if we go up to fillet, we want to fillet the edges of the tire. And let's try maybe 10 mil. And you can see there that just rounds the edges of the tires. Gives it a little bit more of a realistic look. And let's go back to our parameters again. And like I said before, we can adjust all this now. So if we go to tire height, we can make that 40, for example, if we wanted to. Watch what happens. So you can see there it's just adjusted it for us. That probably looks a bit too high. I'm going to try 25. I think that might be the sweet spot. 25, I like that. Now, we can also adjust that center hub that I was talking about before. So we change that to 60. That should adjust for us as well. There we go. So you can see we've made that a little bit bigger. And now you can see the power of using these parameters, right? Use parametric modeling. Go check out my course. Learn all about it. It is awesome. So one other thing we're going to do is add a hole here in the center. If, for example, you were going to use this as for an RC car or something like that, you'd need some way of fixing it to a hub for a motor shaft or something. So we're going to go to our alloy front sketch, or not that one, sorry. We're going to go to alloy pattern sketch. Let's zoom in and let's just create another hole here. Let's make it, let's try 25 millimeters. So we're going to finish that sketch, show the sketch. I'm going to hit E on the keyboard to extrude. I'm just going to select all these parts, just like this. Let's go around the whole thing. And it can get a little bit tricky once you've got so many segments like this. But just select the parts you want. Then we can cut backwards, straight through. And try not to cut back too far. Hit OK. And that should cut a nice little hole for us straight through. There we go. So now we've got a way of securing that on. If we were going to 3D print it and use it for an RC car or something cool. I might even try that, that'd be pretty fun. So now to really add the icing on the cake for this model, what we can do is change the appearance. So if we go up to modify and click appearance, there's a tab on the right here, and sometimes it doesn't pop up. You want to click these two arrows and you will see it. So there it is. So in here we've got a bunch of different materials basically, and you can apply them to your model. So I'm going to apply this under metals here. We've got this polished metal. I'm going to drag that into my palette here. And there's another one under rubber called weathered rubber. And literally all you have to do is drag and drop. So we can drag the rubber one onto the tire. You can see that's applied it. And then we're going to drag the polished metal one onto our front alloy and our outer alloy. And there we go. How awesome is that? We've just created our own alloy wheel from scratch in Fusion 360. And you can see, for something that looks really, really complicated, it wasn't that difficult. Some of these concepts can take a while to get your head around, but once you pass that initial steep learning curve of Fusion, which hopefully my course will help you with, you're able to just use these tools, and they literally just become tools for you to create awesome things. And I'm going to start doing some more tutorials like this where we create some more useful things. Hopefully you'll find it useful and you'll be able to pick it up. But I hope you found this one useful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.